It's 1743, and two men, both called William, are fighting it out in an Edinburgh court. One, William Duff, exerts incredible political influence and has money to burn. The other, William Adam, is one of the early doyens of the Scottish Enlightenment. He's an architect of great renown, and he's also an entrepreneur, running his own quarries and stonemasonry business out of Queensferry, near Edinburgh. And he's seriously out of pocket. You see, Adam has designed a beautiful country pile for Duff, the former MP for Banffshire. And in order to ensure that he's getting the best stone and the best masons, Adam has selflessly offered the services of his own side hustles, the stone from his very own quarry and his very own stonemasons.
Mr. Duff wanted this house built yesterday. He was being bombasted by his friends. Show off your wealth. Show it. Let the people see what you've got. He had a lot of money. A very, very rich family indeed.
That's the voice of John Mayer, the facilities and monument manager at Duff House. He's actually lived on the property for 30 years and has an encyclopedic knowledge of the house's history.
They didn't have a contract. The house started to get built, but there was a little bit of a wrangle before then because Duff had bought forests. He'd bought hundreds of acres of land to supply the timber for the house because he wanted to cut out the middleman. But then Adam said, the wood's not seasoned. I need to wait another 6 months before it's seasoned. Oh, I don't want to wait, said Mr. Duff, we think, and told Adam, where can we get the wood? Oh, you can get it in my yard in Kirkcaldy. Champion, do it. And the same went for the stone. The quality of stone he was getting from the quarry that he had purchased was not good enough, said Mr. Adam. Duff had neither way of knowing, and he just acknowledged that fact.
Of course, it'll cost William Duff a pretty penny when you consider the many ornate carvings which decorate every elevation of the property. They don't come cheap. Then you have the fact that Banff, nestled on the faraway northeast coast of Scotland, isn't the easiest place to reach. Boats and barges from Lothian, they don't come cheap either.
And with all of this transportation taking place by ship, coming up to the bay, transporting to a barge, the barge coming up a canal that was dug, pulled by horse, all of these expenses started to multiply. So that was the downfall between the both of them.
Duff refuses to pay, citing the lack of a proper contract. And that's how we end up here, in court, with the verdict about to be read out.
All rise.
The court finds in Adam's favor, and that will trigger a run of misadventures that will play out over nearly 300 years. Adam will die before he receives what he's due, but his sons Robert, John, and James will benefit from the windfall as they refine the famous Adam style. William Duff, Lord Braco of Kilbride, goes on and continues to acquire money, power, and titles. In 1759, he became the first Earl Fife and Viscount Macduff, after he managed to prove that he was the direct descendant of the ancient Earls of Fife, Macbeth's foe from the Scottish play. You know, beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife. But for all of William Duff, Lord Braco of Kilbride, Earl Fife, Viscount Macduff's power, money, and influence, he couldn't bring himself to finish work on his palatial country pile, and never spent a night in the house after its expensive loss to William Adam. Duff House would sit empty, its unfinished rear facing into Banff Bay, until it was eventually fitted out by William Duff's son, the second Earl Fife, who realized that in order to properly cement his family's stranglehold on politics in the area, he needed a fabulous home to wow his guests. The second Earl would go on to make a significant contribution to the local area, including renaming the nearby borough of Doon to Macduff. But his time in the house? For the most part, it seems like he was very happy there, except for one time when his estranged wife shot him in the Long Gallery. But that's another story. I bet you're thinking, that guy sounds very Canadian. Why is he interested in a country house in Aberdeenshire? My name is Kevin James. I'm one of millions of Canadians with a deep interest in Scottish history and culture. So much so that I'm a professor of Scottish history at the University of Guelph, and I hold the Scottish Studies Foundation Chair and direct the Scottish Studies Centre there. Let me take you inside a meeting at Duff House back in May 2025.
I've got some discussion points I want to talk about around the stories we tell about our site and the stories other people tell of their sites and what we could learn from them.
That's Graham, Historic Environment Scotland's district visitor and community manager for the Grampian area. He's invited people from all across the Scottish heritage sector to discuss the future of a stately home, which has often been described as a white elephant.
So my name's Kevin. So I work for University of Guelph, that's how it's pronounced. No one in Canada knows how to pronounce it, so we would just say, don't worry.
And that's me. I've been asked to delve into the archives and find out more about the varied 20th century uses of Duff House. And I'm about to present my findings to the meeting.
That's my initial interest is as a historian of hotels. And I was interested in country house hotels after I finished a large project.
I'd always intended to make a podcast about this place. But as I walked the corridors and met the people who look after it, I began to realize it gets under your skin. I'm going to go beyond the bricks and mortar, taking you back in time to tell the story of one of Scotland's quirkiest stately homes. Welcome to the many lives of Duff House. Since the 18th century, Duff House has been an imposing part of the landscape of Banff, a beautiful little town in Aberdeenshire with its own unique architectural heritage. Duff House is no exception. Its outside is adorned with so much ornate decoration, and its 4 stories are so imposing that it might well be an alien spacecraft dropped on the little port town in order to study their ways. It was home to 6 generations of the Earls Fife, whose stories in themselves are probably enough to fill this entire program. But suffice it to say, their house was the backdrop to many a family party and many a family tragedy. But change comes for us all, and the Earls were no different. The 6th Earl, Alexander, had followed in the family business of being incredibly wealthy and powerful, taking his seat in the House of Lords after a stint in the Commons as MP for Elginshire and Nairnshire. He was a lifelong friend of Queen Victoria's playboy son Bertie, the future Edward VII. In 1885, he met and fell for Princess Louise, the future Princess Royal, the granddaughter of Queen Victoria and, the daughter of his good friend Bertie. Louise begged her grandmother to approve of their marriage, and she eventually agreed, but the marriage between a royal and a run-of-the-mill member of the aristocracy, albeit a very rich one, wasn't very popular.
It was slated in London in the press. So there was complaints that it was not blue blood and it was another Scottish person that was marrying, even though he was a lord. So she tried to appease the community a little, and 2 days after the marriage at Buckingham Palace between Princess Louise and Lord Fife, she elevated his dignity and he received the title of Duke of Fife, something only a king or a queen could present, a wedding gift that no one else could give him.
Following his marriage, the newly titled First Duke of Fife was spending more and more time in London, and at his home at Mar Lodge, which lies about 100 miles as the crow flies from Duff House. Mar Lodge had been completed in 1895, and by comparison with his ancestral pile was a luxury pad with all the mod cons included. It was also built to Princess Louise's exacting specifications in the Elizabethan revival style that was incredibly popular at the time. To cut a long story about a completely different house short, Mar Lodge was a new shiny thing, and poor Duff House, now in its 2nd century, just couldn't compete. By 1906, the Duke and Duchess had resolved to get rid of Duff House and made the decision to gift the property, along with its 140 acres of land, to the boroughs of Banff and Macduff. But as Rosemary Willis, one of the stewards, told me, the family's influence on the area was always present.
Must have felt like a real loss because the Duffs had been living along this coast since the 1300s. They'd had grants of land from Robert the Bruce. They'd been absolutely actively involved. They'd been MPs for Elgin and for Banff for hundreds of years. So they were involved in the politics, absolutely involved in the economics. And so it must have been like having their, for the townsfolk in Banff and Macduff, like having their right arm cut off when this gift was given, and then the Duffs retreated elsewhere.
We don't know exactly why they decided to give up their pile. There's no evidence of the family having any financial issues. But with a modern eye, it's hard to imagine anyone giving up a property like this completely out of the goodness of their hearts. Add to that the fact that the house's furniture was then sold off at auction, something that the current custodians of the house have wrestled with when trying to provide visitors with an authentic experience. Only one original object from Duff House could be located. While taking the meeting's attendees on a tour, John points out an ornate mirror which hangs in the north drawing room. It depicts two gold leaf-covered cherubs reaching out into a space in the center of the mirror, where something has been broken off.
If you look at this looking glass, that was one object that the Duke of Fife and his wife, the Princess Royal, didn't take with them or didn't sell. And I think it's purely because of its size. But when it was pointed out to him that the looking glass still had a coronet at the top of it, being held by the two cupids, he decided that he wasn't going to leave that to the two towns of Banff and Macduff. So he called for his estate workers to come in and saw it off. And he marched out of the house with it under his arm, shall we say, romantically.
Following the furniture sale in 1907, the suggestions that the house might be left to rack and ruin began almost immediately. After all, the cost for the twin borough councils of Banff and Macduff to keep the property in good condition would be huge. The Duke's factor even sent a letter in 1907 claiming that the Duke would be willing to rescind his gift and retain ownership of the property. He probably meant this more in rebuke of his gift not being well received, but the tone does smack of a "it's my ball, and I only said you could play with it." You're going to hear the term white elephant a lot in the next little while, and on an instinctive level, most people know what it means. But the story itself is quite interesting. In ancient Thailand, the white elephant was seen as sacred and was a sign that the monarch was just and powerful. The presence of white elephants meant that the kingdom was both prosperous and peaceful, and anyone else who owned one was seen as an opulent member of the aristocracy with plenty of cash to lavish around. But the truth was that sacred white elephants were, generally speaking, quite useless. They couldn't work, and they became financial burdens on the people who were forced to keep them. There were even suggestions that the king was so aware of the burden of these animals that he gave them out to people whom he perceived as having wronged him. Now, there's no suggestion at all that the Duke of Fife had anything but the highest regard for those living in Banff and Macduff. Though, it's worth just bearing in mind that over the next 30 years, many aristocrats began selling off their country houses to cut costs and ensure the financial future of their lines. Being able to do away with the high-running costs of a house you barely visit must have sounded ideal to a duke with aspirations beyond the family's original sphere of influence. That raises the question, what do you do with a building like Duff House? For the two councils, the ultimate solution had to ensure that no additional costs were incurred by the people of the boroughs, which meant passing the house over to someone with money to invest in the property. After all, up until this moment, it had been someone else's overlooked second home, so there was plenty of work to be done. Ian Williams, chairperson of the Friends of Duff House, told me that there were some pretty wild ideas.
All the machinations that Duff House trustees, the two borough councils, went through trying to decide what the house should be used for. Should it be a swimming pool? They were talking about changing the ground floor to be a swimming pool.
The idea of using the house as swimming baths dried up quickly, although maybe the addition of a brightly coloured flume might have saved the house from decades of uncertainty. There was a great deal of interest in the local area and beyond. Letters came into the council from all over, offering ideas for the future of the property, like this one from John Purvis, an engineer who was based in Exeter, at the opposite end of the United Kingdom.
As a Scotsman and one who knows Duff House well, I have been much interested in reading the various accounts of the munificent gift that the Duke of Fife has made to the two sister towns of Banff and Macduff. I have not heard if anything definite has been determined on and as to what is to be made of the house and grounds, and in the absence of any information on this head, I would like to throw out a suggestion that in the interests of both towns, and in order to still further popularise an already charming country resort, you might consider converting Duff House into one of these palatial hotels that have done so much to make the place near them.
Eventually, the council decided that the likes of Purvis had a point, and pursued two paths towards tourism. The first was a hydropathic establishment where the burgeoning middle class would book, at great expense to themselves, to be subjected to a strict regimen of water-based treatments that, to my modern mind, don't sound even slightly relaxing. Now, the second plan was much simpler. You see, Duff House sits nestled in acres of beautiful green space with ample opportunities for hunting, shooting, and fishing.
The late residence of the Princess Royal and His Grace the Duke of Fife, now an up-to-date sporting hotel standing in its own park and golf course. Play on the Duff House golf course and start a new lease of life. The air of Banff on the Moray Firth is the best you can breathe in Scotland. When you are tired of golf, you can fish on the River Devon, which runs through the beautiful grounds up to the Bridge of Alva, or shoot over 20,000 acres. Right for tariff.
And so it was settled. Duff House would become a sporting hotel for the great and the good to weekend at the property and get the full experience of country house luxury at a rate more amenable to their wallets. As I mentioned earlier, though, Banff lies in the remote northeast of Scotland. Rosemary again.
Banff has always been not quite on the beaten track between Aberdeen and Elgin and Inverness, but there was still a Banff train station here at the time that it was a hotel. I suspect it was remoteness from the sort of clientele who were wanting to come for a fine dining, luxurious living stay probably weren't coming to Banff.
For the well-heeled set coming from London and the surrounding areas, the journey took nearly a full day by train. In fact, it took me almost as long to do the same journey in 2025. Well, this wasn't necessarily an unusual length of journey at the time, or today apparently. Those looking for the freedom of a sporting break at a luxury hotel would be as well served by properties much closer to home. Within 3 years, plans were already afoot to alter Duff House's purpose again. So what's next? Rip it all up and start again? Get the plans for the swimming pool out of the bottom of the filing cabinet? Unfortunately not. The Duff House flume would have to wait. Maybe one day. The hotel's 99-year lease was to be reassigned to another great institution of the Edwardian era, the sanatorium.
Complaints suitable for treatment at Duff House. Sufferers from the following complaints are suitable for admission. Diseases and derangements of the stomach and intestines, including dyspepsia, ulceration, colitis, habitual constipation, glycosuria, diabetes, gout, obesity, anemia, Graves' disease, cases of the heart or arterial disease, including high tension, which require dietetic treatment with aerated baths and regular exercise, cases of emaciation of obscure origin or of subnutrition after operations, severe illness, overwork, or other strain, patients in whom a course of dietetic treatment, chemical analysis, X-ray examinations, or other detailed observation is required in order to establish diagnosis. Patients suffering from the following complaints are not admitted: infectious diseases, including active pulmonary tuberculosis, hypochondriasis, severe neurosis, or mental affections.
Dr. Edmund Spriggs opened Duff House Sanatorium in September of 1913, primarily concerned with the treatment of gastric conditions. And you'll never guess what.
It was very successful, and Dr. Spriggs was later knighted.
Surprise! The Duff House Sanatorium was immensely popular and made a lot of money. People would travel from all over the country to be treated by the eminent Dr. Spriggs and enjoy the beautiful surroundings of Banffshire. The problem was solved. Duff House was saved. Even through the years of the First World War, the sanatorium turned a profit for a full decade after opening. It welcomed 60% of its clientele from England, proving that in the right circumstances, people were willing to travel to remotest Aberdeenshire. But
he had outgrown his popularity here. There was not enough accommodation for him to get in his patients, and patients meant money.
Uh-oh. Faced with the reality of having too many patients to satisfy demand, the company that ran it offered to purchase the property outright in 1921 to allow it to expand. From there, things started to go south, and I mean literally. The purchase was unanimously rebuffed by the twin councils of Banff and Macduff. After all, the Duke had left his big white elephant to them, not to Dr. Spriggs and his infirmary for irritable bowels. Faced with the rebuke of their landlords, the Duff House Sanatorium did what any business in that situation would do. They looked for new premises. In 1923, Duff House Sanatorium closed their doors at the real Duff House in Banff and reopened their doors at the fake Duff House in Denbigh, North Wales. They had taken their business south, closer to their English core market, moved into Ruthin Castle, and continued to go from strength to strength,
continuing the scientific investigation and treatment of illness, and for the maintenance of health in those with no disease.
Apparently treating the likes of Sir Lawrence Olivier and Omar Sharif right up until 1962, when Ruthin Castle was bought and turned into, of all things, a luxury hotel. You can still stay there today. Back at Duff House Actual, the luxury hotel idea had crept its way back onto the planning table of the two councils. Presumably the plans for the big flume had been thrown out completely by this point. With nobody forthcoming to take on the house, the sanatorium continued to pay the lease despite having opened their other premises in Wales. So desperate were they not to be in Banff that they were willing to pay double rent. At great expense, the renovations for the sanatorium were removed and it was refitted once again to become a slightly less luxurious country house hotel.
The former residence of the late Duke of Fife and Princess Royal will be opened as a hotel on 6th of April 1925. Stands in own grounds, electric light, hoist, hot and cold water in every bedroom. Furnished by Waring and Gillow. Golf, tennis, fishing, shooting, garage. Applications for rooms may, meantime, be made to the Secretary S. Easton Simmers, CA, 156 St Vincent Street, Glasgow.
It's safe to say, though, that the new hotel wasn't quite as grand as its guests might have been expecting, and it didn't last long.
They would have felt like they were stepping into a really grand, wonderful getaway, and then they might have found it a little bit peeling and cracked at the edges, and that would have added to its charm. What would have been really enticing would have been enjoying staying in the house, being looked after, and then going for walks through Rackwood, going and possibly stumbling upon a mausoleum and the intrigue of that, and just explore, as we enjoy doing in this part of Scotland even now.
After the hotel closed, the house sat empty, living a new life in an unprofitable hinterland between upkeep and abandonment. Meanwhile, the nearby golf course, whose land had also been handed over by the Duke of Fife, was thriving, offering special rates to residents of the boroughs. In fact, throughout all of the attempts to inject life into the building, the grounds had been well used by the local community. The same's true today. When we visited, there were people out jogging, dog walkers throwing sticks on the immaculate lawn, kids squealing with joy in the nearby play park, and through a thick row of trees separated from the rear of the house by mere feet, there were people playing golf. That's where we caught up with Ian Williams, chair of the Friends of Duff House.
The Duff House grounds, 140 acres or whatever was given in 1906, is much bigger than the house itself. The house is the millstone, not the grounds. The grounds are used now by tens of thousands of people a year.
Amid this idyllic setting, it's quite hard to imagine the next life of Duff House.
I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
In 1939, the Second World War came to Banffshire, and the house became the requisitioned property of the UK government.
People were encompassed in this house within its walls. There was a wire fence outside.
At the onset of war, the British government was faced with the enemy within. People, many of whom had lived in the UK for generations, who were of German, Austrian, or Italian heritage and were suddenly considered potential enemy combatants.
They were kept here for 3 or 4 weeks before they were moved into a more fitting places and accommodation for them, because these people were under suspicion that they were spies or potential spies. So they all had to be filtered through and processed.
As the war progressed, Britain caught a spy fever that saw thousands of people interned. But by 1940, the interned people had been moved out and new residents had moved in. On the 1st of July 1940, one of Hitler's dreaded attack submarines, U-26, was detected by a Royal Navy corvette and forced to surface by depth charges which it dropped. The crew was captured, and, with a lack of prison of war camps available, they were dispatched to Camp Number 5. You might be familiar with it already.
When they arrived at Macduff and smelt the salt air, they must have felt at home being sailors. But they weren't at home because they were going to Duff House and they were to be imprisoned in there. So it wasn't long before that smell of the salt air was now the rattle of wire cages around them on the outside and soldiers parading up and down outside as guards and machine gun posts. So they were locked up inside the house.
Despite one of the German crew describing Camp Number 5 as a wonderful location, their introduction to the Scottish weather was less so. July was unseasonably wet, with thunderstorms rising up out of nowhere. Temperatures struggled to rise above 15 degrees centigrade. And then, out of the showery skies on the morning of Monday, the 22nd of July, there came the sound of engines. A solitary Henkel HE-111, the long-range bomber of the Luftwaffe, appeared and began circling Macduff before breaking off its loop and flying straight towards Duff House. From the perspective of the pilot and the bombardier, the site would have looked important, nestled in the trees, surrounded by Nissen huts with a high barbed wire fence. It was 9 a.m. Many of the prisoners were exercising in the yard, making the most of a little burst of sunshine. The bomb bay doors on the Henkel opened, and it dropped 4 bombs, sending the Kriegsmarine crew and the guards scattering for their lives. One bomb struck the east wing, a later addition from the 19th century, which had expanded the house's capacity for kitchens and servants. 6 of the prisoners were killed, along with 2 guards, in what was the only German-on-German friendly fire incident on UK soil in World War II. The prisoners were then moved, as was the government's wont at the time, to Canada, and the house began another lease on life as it was taken over by various regiments of the Allied armies, including Norwegians and Poles. In fact, you can still see their legacy on the walls of the house today. There are a number of signs etched onto the walls in Polish script which read, "Smoking strictly forbidden." In the long gallery, where legend suggests that the second Earl of Fife was once shot by his wife, there's a stunning painted Norwegian flag, testament to the Norwegian regiments who briefly called the house home. But, as Ian Williams tells me, there's another mysterious piece of wall art which tells us much more of the Second World War history of the house.
If the Germans were going to invade, this was the most likely place they would come, be it from Norway or indeed from the continent. So that there were soldiers stationed here, headquartered here at Duff House and the Nissen huts that were out there. One of the things we found in Duff House is a map on the wall of an exercise, presumably an exercise, of where the Germans were going to invade, what brigades they might come with, what British and Allied forces there would be to repel them.
Following the end of the war, the house was abandoned and left to rack and ruin. The War Office no longer had any use for it, and in terms of it being reassigned to former or future owners, there were many more important things to worry about.
There wasn't a pane of glass left. There was no lead. There was no copper. Everything had been stolen out of the house. It wasn't until 1956-57 when the towns of Banff and Macduff, with their committee that looked after the ownership of Duff House, met with a scrap merchant from Coatbridge beside Glasgow, who offered them money to take the house away. And fortunately, by a minor majority, they said no.
Interestingly, though, in spite of this prolonged period of dereliction, some of the house's most human stories take place here, among the decaying plaster and rubble. Duff House guide Rosemary met people who had an unusual connection.
I met a couple who were sitting out in the playground on the outskirts here, and they were there for their 60th, not their 60th wedding, their 60th engagement anniversary. And the man proposed to the woman in the derelict Duff House, and there had been a janitor and he let them in, and then they roved all over the place, enjoying the sort of decrepit ambience. And after that, the man then proposed to his wife. And then they were back 60 years later to remember that this was the place in which he proposed to her. And they said it was that the decrepitness was actually delightful for them in their early 20s. I don't know why. And I've met other folk who have said similar things. What they did say was that at the point when he proposed to her, there was still barbed wire up absolutely everywhere. And so there must have been a feeling like it had been a former prisoner of war camp at that stage.
Duff House was saved from eventual demolition, and the long period of repair and restoration meant that, while the house was directionless for many years, it was moving back in the right direction. In the intervening years, many ideas were floated for the future of Duff House, ranging from an aristocratic residence, again, to a luxury hotel, again, to an overseas club, again basically an exclusive hotel, to private flats, to an archive. In 1988, the site was taken over by the organisation which now goes by Historic Environment Scotland, which convened a public meeting to find out what the future of the site should be. By 1992, with most of the renovations of the 20th century now completely reversed, the house was turned into the country house gallery that we have today. Graham, the district visitor and community manager, explained to me how the partnership works.
We have a tripartite agreement between Aberdeenshire Council, the National Galleries of Scotland and Historic Environment Scotland, in which the Aberdeenshire Council support us both financially and in terms of input, help, steerage, advice, resources. The National Galleries provide the pictures that we show in the house, and we run the operation of the house.
Of course, we now come full circle. Visitor numbers have never been high at the gallery, and many members of the local community feel held apart from the operation and life of the building, even though they may well use the grounds on a daily basis. A lot of people find themselves asking, what exactly is a country house gallery?
I don't think there is a precise concept of a country house gallery, and I think that's part of the challenge, that some of our audience understand that as a concept because they've grown up near one or with one. I think the definition of country house gallery is flexible, and if it suits us to keep it and work with it because it's flexible, we'll do that. If we decide that it's no longer sufficiently relevant, we might present the house in a different manner.
So the old question arises, what is the future of Duff House? Instead of letting it slip into obscurity, Graham and his team have arranged this meeting 30 years on from the house's reopening, the one you heard me presenting to at the beginning of this story. Other groups, organizations, and members of the community who have a stake in what happens to Duff House have come together to share ideas and their own experiences. What's clear, though, is that whatever happens, they want to ensure that the house is not only here for future generations of Banff and Macduff natives, but also that it serves the communities now. What do the people closest to the house want, though?
It's a prestige thing to have Duff House here. When we have talks in the house, speakers will readily come to give a talk in Duff House because of its prestige status. And I've seen people's CVs that say, we give talks at Duff House. I would like to see it to be less of a museum and more of a space used by the local community, but at the same time, still being a tourist attraction.
I've always wanted to be able to put on some kind of augmented reality glasses and to be able to walk around and see it when it was a hotel and see it when they were doing the water treatments and see it when it was a prisoner of war camp and see it when the Duke of Fife was cutting out the crown out of the mirror and leaving the poor cherubs with stumps, and to be able to dial a channel on my augmented reality glasses and just see it in every era.
What I don't want to do now is put in place one model and then say we have to stick that forever, because around the community in the area things will inevitably change. So what I'd like is a model that will evolve over time, but at the core of that people will recognise the fact that the house has been here for a substantial amount of time and in different ways has always played a role in the life of the communities of Banff and Macduff and wider Aberdeenshire. It's, I think, important that we don't impose something on the house now that is too inflexible, and we allow it to grow and develop as people need it. I think that's the only way that the house will prosper.
I would like it to be a centre of influence for education, both in art and the education of young people. I would like that very much, because with young people you get an effective feeling of stewardship from them towards the property, and I would like them to think that too, and they could also pass that on to their next generations.
I don't think that I really understood how Duff House's many lives have impacted the surrounding area and its people. When I began my research, I thought that this was just the story of a white elephant, a stately home with no real purpose in the modern age, left twisting in the wind by a combination of poor location and overambition. What I found was quite different. Yes, Duff House has been hamstrung by its location, but the people engaged in its preservation and development are so passionate, the house so striking and impactful, that it's hard to think of a future where Banff is left without a role for its most imposing landmark. Whatever becomes of the house, whether it continues as is or evolves into something altogether different, I now understand that the challenges the house has faced over the years in one way or another have always been overcome. While successive projects and business ideas have come and gone, the emotional investment of people like Rosemary, Ian, John, and Graham in Duff House has endured and blossomed. Through the partnership of Historic Environment Scotland, Aberdeenshire Council, and the National Portrait Gallery, there is a potential bright future for the site. You've been listening to The Many Lives of Duff House. It was presented by me, Kevin James. It was written by myself and Michael Wilson Park. It was produced by Michael Wilson Park with engineering and mastering by Brian McAlpine for The Big Light.
From the Big Light Studio.